Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Jennifer Gursky. I'm with the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation. This is the part 3 of our Underrepresented Communities Historic Resources Survey series that we're doing. And Bill Quackenbush is here, and he is our guest speaker, which we're very excited about. A couple quick housekeeping items. As usual, everyone is muted for the presentation, and then after the presentation, we will turn that off and allow you guys to unmute yourselves so you can ask Bill any question that you'd like. You can also pop any questions that you want in the chat. That's at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat button. You can put those questions in there. You can have Bill answer them after the presentation. We're also recording this presentation, so it'll be available on our YouTube page. A link will go up on our website, and we will also have links in our newsletter and things like that. So you can access those there. Just make sure we've got everyone in here. Okay. All right, and Bill, we've got just a quick intro. Bill Quackenbush is a Ho-Chunk Deer Clan member, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Cultural Resources Division Manager. In 1999, William began working for the Ho-Chunk Nation Heritage Preservation Department as a land specialist focusing on realty, land into trust applications, and cultural and natural resource management. In 2004, the Cultural Resources Division requested for William to be transferred to their division internally as a researcher, then to become the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Ho-Chunk Nation, who was at the time creating the HCN Tribal Historic Preservation Officer program to address tribal preservation needs. William has served as in this position from 2005 until present. In 2008, he also became the Cultural Resources Division Manager. And I'd like to welcome Bill.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer. That sounded like somewhat of a mouthful that you're reading off there. I'm going to, if you folks don't mind, open up a PowerPoint, and hopefully this will come up to your screen there. Does everybody see that screen? I'm guessing everybody's nodding yes right now. But at any rate, for this presentation here, several weeks ago, if not a month ago, I was asked to see if I would be willing to join a presentation via Zoom there to participate in talking about a survey, a research survey that was conducted here by Madison Historic Conservancy. Is what I'm getting to? It's a Madison Trust of Historic Preservation. And I wasn't too familiar with the group, and I was kind of interested to see what this research survey was doing. That said, what she had read was basically this one sheet document I always send people when they ask, they want to know a little bit about myself. And so I send them this sheet there that just a bulleted thing that talks about myself. And the most important aspects on there is that I was born and raised in Wisconsin, in Black River Falls area. I have a wife and 4 children. They've all grown up, and my 18-year-old now is going to college in La Crosse this fall, unfortunately, for Madison. You guys are going to miss a good one there. But anyway, she's going to La Crosse there until she figures out exactly what she wants to do in life too. So. And as she said, though, I've been working for the Ho-Chunk Nation for the better part of 20-some years now, and taking on the responsibility and role of as a Tribal Historic Preservation Officer has been an interesting, career choice in developing that process to assume the responsibilities of the state on our tribal properties and and as part of our sovereign processes there. I didn't really know what we were getting into until we did that, but in hindsight, it's been a big learning curve, but it's also been very rewarding. That said, when I began to review this research survey document here, I had jotted down a few things here to to consider. And I may or may not fully cover all these bullets that's in this presentation, but so that's why I wrote it down. As speaking as a tribal preservation representative, I tend to talk mostly about my experience with the Ho-Chunk people. And that works in well, you know, I would say in part, in talking about the Madison area and the city of Madison as well. We have a long, steep history, you know, of that area as part of our ancestral footprint. I was happy to look at the report and see, you know, the recognition at the various levels of that. And Jennifer, if you can speak up anytime if I'm not speaking loud enough, and or if it's not clear, by all means, you know, you can mention it too. But that said, I'll be the first to say that I like to speak of tribes and not for tribes or First Nations as they're documented in this survey. That's one of the things I often see people juggle, you know, when they're doing research on various ancestral people, right? Are they tribes? Or are they First Nations? Or are they Indians? And people often ask these questions, and so they try to encompass it all, you know. But then doing that, I often find it resorts to kind of a conglomeration of all tribes in general. People tend to use in surveys. So that said, when I finished, you know, I was to offer a moment of question and answers, and but then Jennifer also said that throughout the presentation, you have the ability to also, on your right-hand side, hopefully, is write in comments there, and that'll help jog your memory, and or if I answer the questions, you know, maybe you can put on, oh, you answered that. So anyway, I was really excited though when I read the survey, and that there was this reference to it as being a living document, something that isn't going to be thrown in the back corner of some file cabinet there, and something that becomes dated the moment you open it up and read it. I'll be anxious also to see how it remains a living document, if it's to be revisited, you know, if it's going to be something that is used for citable material. That's what I often look for, and everybody's time is limited, they say. So when I now do research and I sit down to read, I'm pretty, my time is somewhat limited, being quite busy nowadays. So I pick and choose what I read and what I have to set aside. So. With that said, there it is. There's the documents cover sheet. When I speak about, you know, for the next few minutes, this is my perspective. So what's within the materials, and the way I see it as a third party looking in as a tribal representative, for example. And you'll see the bullets. And Jennifer, can you see my mouse moving around?
Yes, we can.
I have a bad habit. Sorry about that, because that thing will be moving steady. So I'm just going to stick it over in the white and leave it. So that said, some of the things that I noticed from the survey was that it recognizes historical connections, and that it would benefit to include, you know, and encompass the underrepresented groups. And I was trying to think, you know, within my few years in preservation, have I seen this happen before? And I've seen, you know, steps towards that, you know, whether it's informal or formal, you know, whether it's by the public or by private individuals, you know, and it's something that does take place. It takes place regularly, but not really on, you know, the municipal level, or very rarely do you see it at a state or federal level. When you do it, I take note of that, because I want to see just how far and or what encourage that to begin to take place. One of the things I noticed with this document too is that the references to the ancient civilizations, or the connection of, us humans, right, societies to this area. And it has a brief reference to way back since, the beginning of this area as far as man being recognized here. But it's usually just a paragraph or two. I noticed that in a lot of my research that, there isn't much said, and there's this quick jump from, the thousands of years to the historic periods. And then there's a lot of historic period, documentation to try to fulfill that connection. And so that's where at times I see where people are dropping the ball on that process. But you'll see, mentioned quite a lot because of Madison, the mound systems here, the effigy boards, and it's referenced as earthworks, right? There's various forms of earthworks here that expanded a certain period of time. Of course, there's mentions of villages here, the whole chunk, and other tribes coming and going. But what happens is sometimes you'll see predominantly a viewpoint of the archaeological type. The datings of periods of times is done from an archaeological viewpoint, right? And that's how a document gets written. They begin using this terminology that becomes more, for lack of a better term, scientific, right? Something that it can hold weight, that can be citable, that somebody can look back at some preponderance of evidence, and so on and so forth. So, another thing I noticed though with the document right here, and I didn't want to say does not because it may, because my first glance at it, this is the notes I took, that it is, I wrote down include all facets of First Nations lifestyle. It does not do that very well. And that's why, being a living, document, this is, some room for improvement and some inclusion of, some additional feedback from tribes. And I know it's probably initial stages, which is good. And what is the material going to be used for, right? I noticed the preponderance of focusing on landmarks and something tangible or something to go over and say, oh my God, there's something here that, tells us a little bit more about the history of the Madison area, the city of Madison. But, one of the things that people often overlook, is lifestyle, so ways of life, some tribes will call it traditionally. Is that there's very little documentation that's accurate, in fact, of the social life, right? The society of life, and the environments around them, plays, and still does a heavy role in who we are, shapes us, right? The culture, that cultural component. And people tend to generalize that stuff. Well, they're Native Americans, they live, in nomadic lifestyles and blah, blah, blah. And you get past a certain year and then all of a sudden become woodland Indians or woodland, period, and archaic and paleo and so on and so forth. And so it becomes very generalized. And then a lot of, the spiritual components is missing. And yet if you look at cities, City of Madison, it's no different than, our villages of old. You have to have those same basic hierarchies of life, right? You have to have, an area or region that can sustain you. And this becomes very important to tribes, is that we assure ourselves that we don't, forget, where we come from or who we are today. And hopefully, we learn from that history, experience. And so we're not destined to repeat something, that may have caused adverse effects to us. But that is hard to put in a document, and how do you utilize that to make and enhance Madison's history, right? It's a difficult thing to do, but I have a really good, thought in that this document is a great step forward to do that, which is a good thing. That it has all the makings of something that as a living document can only stand to get better. And that tribal perspectives seem generalized. I will go back to that, is that it's easy to do, and that last thought on the bottom, understandably difficult to find written doc information. And what researchers find is that it is hard, to do. But the good thing about that is that, through time and research is never completed. I mean, there's always something that comes out of the woodwork, and further research from, different areas help enhance that process. We often find that, when we study or want to do some research about ourselves at a given period of time or an area there, we don't have the information. Other tribes may have that information. I mean, they're just doing as much as research as we are, and they're looking at it from a tribal perspective. They run into these little tidbits out there. So we network together and we collaborate and we share, information, which is, you don't hear of that, in times past, but here we are working together for the betterment of, ourselves. We don't have it, if the archives and, the local and the regional and then Washington doesn't have it, well, then you need to go to Canada. I mean, the French were here, and the British and the Americans. I mean, they all took notes. They loved to take notes. They loved to draw maps, and that you can gain so much by looking at one document. And so that all comes back to this, this survey. It is somewhat of a guiding tool, initially to see how these underrepresented groups of people there, can perhaps, help the city of Madison regarding a more enhanced, culturally diverse heritage, be incorporated into the history here. So. And based off that last slide, if I continue with this discussion the way it is, we'll be here all night. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but that said, this one sheet here though, is what, when I first began to read this survey, this research survey, this is what this reminded me of. If anybody does any history or involved with that, they'll remember Laura Bush. Her pet project was this Preserve America. And back in 2006, I was requested to go down to New Orleans to sit amongst a few other tribal preservation representatives there to talk a little bit about how we could, assure that the federal government is on the right path. That how do they preserve America through their, their executive order here? Whatever they wanted to, utilize to document and the contributions to the vitality of the economic well-being of the nation's communities. And so, to me, that at that time down there, I was thinking, well, and many of the tribes that had went there, they were missing a big portion of their history of the Americas and how it was shaped, by mankind, society, right? And how this next step with this current administration or government here, and how it has, we have adapted as humans here for that. And then when I went down there, sat there, I think it was 3 days, a lot of food, a lot of New Orleans stuff, and Katrina had just taken place, right? And the main focus was, and 99% of it was how to protect the structures down there, and how to protect these things that made New Orleans what New Orleans is. And the tribes that were local there, they were pretty exasperated over the fact that they couldn't express, to the depth of history that they had, that it should be incorporated into it. And so these little insignias, these ACHP, right, Advisory Council of Historic Preservation, and this one here is Mine Conduit, this is through Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? So all these agencies, they are down there to meet, to talk about preservation. And that really is the last time I heard anything of as far as this executive order. And I'm sure there was money thrown towards the process, and some cities took advantage of, maybe Madison took advantage of, these free dollars of this guidance. But that is what this survey initially is what I thought I was going to be reading. But that said, it wasn't. It was something that was good, and a lot of people don't realize, and many of you do, And right now in Wisconsin, you know, the First Nations or tribes, there's 11, you know, recognized tribes here, federally recognized tribes. There's one that isn't, you know, but they're still a tribe. It's not federally recognized. It makes no difference to them. They carry on, to say. But here's the issue that I tend to run into, and other preservation officers run into, is that there's this mentality of history and prehistory, proto-historic history, and history before history started is what they're saying. So there's tribes that they recognize as they were here, you know, when the first, you know, Algonquins, right, or not Algonquins, the Europeans, you know, came here, 1600s, French, right? So the Sioux and the Anishinaabe and the Ho-Chunk and Omni, you know, those were the ones that are recognized as being here. But even at that time, you had tribes already coming into our area because of the issues they're having out east. So you had these other tribes came through here, stayed for a while, and no longer are here. You know, you had Sac and Fox, Miami, Kickapoo, you know, many of the tribes that you'll see some written documentation. And you have other tribes that were placed here, right? Oneida, Forest County Potawatomi established as an allotment type tribe here. They're not a reservation tribe. So you have a lot of different, you know, processes with tribes. Most all of them recognize Madison at one shape or form as a you know, center, council area where they met. Beloit, you know, right, Green Bay, Madison, these areas across, these areas are council sites, you know, where tribes would meet with other tribes to talk shop about, you know, our life, you know, what was taking place. And Madison was no different than that. And the city of Madison has these great council, you know, could be considered a great council area because of the center. And if you look at, you know, historically, if you look at, you know, Charlie E. Brown's work, you know, he documented Native American aspects here. One of them included the Indian trails, right? And how they had went from, you know, across the expanse of, you know, from the Mississippi to the Great Lakes and all over the place. And there was hubs, and Madison being one of them, you know, and he recognized that. It's no different back then as it is today. It's a beautiful place to live. It has everything you need and more. And that's why it was such a valuable, you know, place for, you know, the Ho-Chunk to talk about, you know, and that's why I have so many stories and references about, you know, the Madison or Day-Jope area, you know, still fresh in our oral history. So that line on the bottom, there is little doubt Native culture plays an important role in Madison's history. So how do we include the full story? You know, I think the goal from this document was to, you know, how do we, you know, utilize or better utilize, you know, these stories these underrepresented groups have, you know, Native Americans or First Nations being one of them. So one of the things that we run into is, oh, and I don't know if this image is from the document, but I think this is a place that's a landmark in Madison, First Church of Christ, you know, in science. I think I took that off the line web mostly just to put it really on here to show how easy it is to designate, you know, a structure, you know, that is, what is it, 50 years or older, as a historic site, right? Landmark, and so on and so forth. There, you just got to document it there, and you get your, you know, story straight, and when you, you know, submit it there, you know, for review, and it's recognized there, you've got a, I guess, a landmark. And that's, I guess, maybe the short way of saying that, but it's a place of worship. It's something that, in part, you know, makes Madison, City of Madison, what it is today. This ability to, you know, create a structure that will stand the, you know, the test of time, and it holds its integrity, and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, it has a story just by looking at it. This here, this is Wingram Mound Group site. No less important than that structure. In fact, I'd almost beg to say it's more important. And yet, we see it turned into a gravel pit. Now, it's a place that in Native culture, effigy mounds are on it. It's this high prominent point over our village areas. It's a place where our men would go to meet, for various reasons, and yet to degrade it to the point where it was looked at through the years as just a mere gravel pit, something that could be destroyed. That picture doesn't really tell the whole picture, obviously, but the mounds, we had linears up there, and the site was and still is a sacred site, and we fight hard, I should say. It's not a past tense. We presently sit and continue to try to protect that site the best we can. And we do that because, these sites are disappearing day in, day out. A private landowner doesn't know a mound on his property is there, and yet he wants to put a pool in his backyard, for example. I'm just stating it this way, is that if it's not cataloged by the state, if it's uncatalogued even, and if it's well known but not cataloged, they can request still to get a permit to disturb and or destroy that site because they're landowners, right? And they can do that because it's not as sacred as, that very church that they go to, that Sunday or whenever it is there to go and conduct their, processes there to stay connected, with their creator. But these sites are being destroyed, throughout the state of Wisconsin and Illinois, and Iowa, Minnesota. I mean, most of my time that I dedicate towards protection of burial sites and stuff of this nature and stuff, right? But takes up a lot of my day, takes up a lot of my week, takes a lot of my life right there. But that said, I think one of the things that we have an opportunity to do together collectively, right, and collaborate on is figure out a way of making it just as easy to create a landmark type status for sites of this nature. And I'm not going to say it hasn't been done. It's just that it's something that, given in today's society, there's not very much comparison, usually taking place about, the significance of sites. So that is something that I kind of look forward to. That living, working document is something that we can use to say, well, here, underrepresented people, they have their own ways of, speaking to their creator. Let's put it that way. And this is all documented, and we're going to submit that there. And if it's a site that's over 50 years old, well, maybe it should be recognized as a landmark, right? So that said, this is that division in societal process of prehistory versus history. History is when man first began to recognize, something, and they pass that, process on to their, children so that they can pass it on to their children and perhaps their grandchildren, so on and so forth. And there's this division. And although we think that oral history has, the same weight or a weight compared to written documentation, I find in the field of preservation, as far as my perspective, that just isn't the case. Even though you see this written, this oral history has to be taken into account. You'll hear that saying. Well, it has to be taken into account, but that doesn't mean that it holds much weight with the people that are doing those reviews. And so that's why there's this difference in opinions as far as, well, if I write it down that this, building is 150 years old, not too much structurally has changed on that, therefore it should become a historic site. And then when you have groups of people saying, well, that's been there for 2,000 years, my ancestors buried in that. Even though the state doesn't say that it's, cataloged, we still want to protect it. We want to turn it into a historic site. And there's this, well, you're going to need to have more proof of that process. And so there's kind of something that I think we can work on together, and that's good. Madison itself, that history I was telling you about, history started before the last glacial period. My Dega, my uncle Conrad Greendeer, he had a series of stories that he mentioned, told us on occasion, he talked about this story that came up recently at another process within City of Madison. They're working on Dejo Paul over their university. He asked, what would you like to name this structure? This is a great opportunity. And instead of calling it Dejo, which it ended up being because it was easier for printers to print it out and computers to write it out, because they couldn't write this out very well. People, they were scared that with that name on there, that it should have been called on there, that people would understand what that is right there. The day Wong Shik Hominigra, he lies there. This lake, so that lake is Lake Ndora. That's Ho Chunk's word for that. It's a story that comes with that. And Conroy tell that story of this young man that was speaking, he was fasting and so on. The story's a long story. But anyway, the oral history is so strong, about, and very definite about the creation of these lakes and how that last glacier period, had receded and created, this waterway, and how the Yahara River, the Catfish River, is a beautiful story. But in order for us to, talk about that, it takes you back into a period of time when, there was my ancestors were standing here watching, glacier recede, in a place of refuge, they call it. And today they call that what they refer to that area as a driftless area. This is where people lived 10 to 12,000 years ago. And they lived, until that glacier began to recede and they followed it back. And this is the stuff that they seen in our environment had changed so much. Anyway, but that story, it talks about that right down here. It places us here. It talks about when these waters were first created. And that's a lot of hearsay. A lot of people say, oh, how do you know that? Well, this next story, this Ruhanichate story, Jim Funmaker talks about, this history of how that last glacier that came here in a short period of time, right about here, an ice dam had flowed. When the earth and the ice had stopped the flow of water of Dichate coming down the Mississippi, and for a brief period of time it flowed up to the Wisconsin River here, and it caused the water to flow backwards. And in that story it talks about this big lake. Well, anyway, so he's talking about a period of time when our ancestors sat in this driftless area and was watching from these this unfold. And so those stories have to remain in our oral history, to remind us and our children and our children's children there, the extensive time that we've had here, our historic, history of this area. And so that's in part, I think, with this document, it would be really good for us to incorporate this extensive history of Madison, City of Madison, Dejo, and this Day Wong Chik, this, the creation, of that area and their extensive, and what it means to us today. It still means to us today as it did back then. Very beautiful area, a place where you would meet together and congregate, and I'll show you that in a little bit too, why it's so important to include that in here, because we're missing, that underrepresented processes that we have always missed. A beautiful opportunity for us as people here, all of us, to be able to tell this story. It's all of our history. It's not just one group of people's history. It's all of our history, and it should be told. And if it has to be done through landmarks, if it has to be done through, signage, if it has to be done through projects and programs and plans that municipalities have, and that'd be awesome. So I always talk about, history can be told different ways. An archaeologist, he can tell stories matter of factly in several different ways. Madison, real close to Silver Mound. All these stones, if they were made in Hixton Quartzsite, right? The Clovis Point from the first, peoples here, all the way up through the Archaic and early and late Woodland, all the way up to the period of time when we no longer needed to use stone, and we began getting metal, in this area. The story can be told by the different types of shapes and the expanse of where this valuable material that's indigenous to our area here was. It's in all of the Mississippi watershed area. And it was a valuable, beautiful stone. And so oftentimes our men would take it and trade it for different things and bring it back here. And that talks about something that I'll be presenting, I think, on the 28th there to a group of agriculturalists from the University of Madison there. They asked if I speak there about, Native Americans' awareness on agriculture and how do we, see it here? How did it develop and where it's at today? And it goes back to some of this trade networking, getting those seeds, from down south from the folks down there and bringing them up here. And to do that, we traded something that was a value of ours, was their seed, and it was value to them, but something that we could bring that was unique to us. And in part, this stone was one of those gifts that we would, often take for trade. But archaeologists has a way of telling that story. Madison has a beautiful story. You go to what was the lake farm over there. They said it's been, a multi-component site. History all the way back to the archaic period, continuous. I mean, what a history, and yet we don't take advantage of that. We put a park on it and put trails, and we often dig up our history and throw it in boxes and put them in the Historic Society, and we carry on because today we live for the day, and it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So I do history. One thing that I'm not is a historian. A lot of people say, oh, he's a tribal historic preservation officer. And you'll know, a lot of information about your tribe, but you're not a historian, but you're forced to become one quickly because you're often asked to talk about our history. And so what I did, I was frustrated in talking about, and it was hard for me to speak with, kindergartners, family groups, university level, students, instructors sometimes. And it was hard for me to get across to them the concept of time, of how long we've ancestrally been here. In the Madison, for example. But if you look at this here, and let me see if I can find it. This guy right here, he's Mr. At that time it was 2018, I believe. I took this picture, or somebody did. And so this rope is 50 foot long. Goes out and around the corner, keeps on going. I have a kid standing down there holding that. And that kid is standing on the last glacier period, 12,000 years ago, 50 feet. And each inch on here is, I think, 20 years. So this first portion from here to here of that rope is the historic period since Jean Nicolet stepped ashore in Green Bay in 1634. And time has a way of traveling, and right there, that black dot on that rope there, that's when we become a state, 1848. That's when Madison became capital of what we know as Wisconsin right here, and life was good. During this period of time is what Madison documents, to talk about, the steep history of Madison, and yet the history of Madison alone, we go all the way back to the end of that rope down there, and it talks about all these stories that we have that we could put on this rope here, including that Nukhma Ruhani Day story. Those stories are talking about that glacier and how it had changed our environment, and stories about the plants and animals and all the different things that had changed through the years up this rope here. And this lady right here, she's holding the date of 0, right, on this rope, 0 BC, E or AD, I don't know what they call it, just 0. They said at one time this great man walked the other side of the earth for a period of time, right? It was such an impact on today's society that came here. Christianity came here, and all the different Jesuit priests and all the Catholic priests and so on and so forth. And they wanted to change, people here. Well, in short, that date's important. So that's why it's on that rope right there, because it shows the date and time where it is. Because on the other side of that rope, there's a black mark, and there's a black mark right here. That period of time is when, right in Madison here, you can take, where you wish to go out there and show them the mounds around there. And those are when those mounds are being placed in the mound city, they call this area right here. all the way through that period of time, much longer period of time than the historic periods here. And yet we don't tell that story today. We tell chunks of it. Oh, you know, Charlie Brown, he talks about the effigy mounds and the linears and conicals, and it doesn't ever talk about why they're here. It doesn't ever, nobody ever talks about, you know, of the process involved and what a size and society of people it would have taken to do this here, right? And we miss that. We miss this landmark opportunity right there. And so, but we can change that. We have the ability to change that. We're humans. So let's get this pointer off of here. I'll be moving that thing over around the next hour or so. So how will Madison tell its true history? That's the main reason why, you know, I decided to take on this challenge of sitting on a Zoom and presentation. I was mentioning to Jennifer, I've never did this before, so this is, you guys are guinea pigs, you know, as well. So here I wrote Madison's efforts towards a better historical perspective, and throughout the book I was reading, I go, man, there's tidbits of information on here that I kind of want to use myself a little bit. A lot of good research done, which was very phenomenal. A lot of people, you know, think that, you know, that's cost a lot of money to do that research and so on and so forth. But once it's done, you have it, and if you keep it, you know, correct and add to it, it becomes it's, you know, no, it's not as costly as most people think. So yeah, this in this chapter is education. There I talked about Lincoln Elementary as being, you know, this, you know, I don't know, this entity that, you know, assists in talking about, you know, and showing what, you know, the City of Madison's all about. When I came on there, I thought that was so interesting because there's various schools throughout the Madison and La Crosse, every place you can imagine, contacting us, asking that we come there to talk to them during all things, you know, Indigenous Days or Native American Awareness Month, and it's only like 1 month or 1 week or you know, but this gal called me out of the blue. That was a teacher there. I think she was a 3rd grade teacher. Emily was her name, and she asked if I'd come there and talk a little bit about oral history. And I was like, for 3rd graders, you're talking about oral history. And she wanted to know what important role it played for Native American groups. And I said, well, I can come and do that, Emily. I'm busy. And she goes, oh, no rush, just so we can do it in the next couple of weeks. I'm kind of working on a project. And I said, okay. And I forgot all about it. And she emailed the next week and asked, and I said, oh yeah, I remember. I couldn't even remember, to tell you the truth, her name or the school, but she told me once again, Lincoln Elementary. So in short, I went there. And I only put one picture on here, but this took 2 years. I went there to talk about oral history and the importance of it. And at the end of that presentation, her 3rd graders, and she had taped it, right? Audio taped it. And I told her, I gave them a choice of 3 stories to pick from to show how oral history works. And one of the photos on there that I had, the pictures on this presentation was, you know, the story of the Ho Chunk courting pool. And so, and all this, I said, if you guys want to, you know, pick that, or do you want to hear the story of how the porcupine got its quills, and or, you know, how the birch bark, you know, received, you know, the markings from Kunaga from Thunder. And so these stories are something simple, but they picked the courting food. And so I told the story of the Ho Chunk courting food, which just so happens that this story, in part, you know, involves, you know, the Madison area, the Driftless area. The story goes from Madison up into the Kukupu Valley area, you know, and back again. So anyway, so I told the story, presented them, you know, the history and how that story, you know, is saved from generation to generation. Certain key things you listen to. Well, she liked it, and several weeks later, she called, maybe a month, and she says, Bill, you know, we audio taped that. Is it okay if I use that for the kids to draw your story? I said, yeah, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I couldn't remember who she was hardly. And I said, yeah, that's perfectly fine. And she goes, well, we're thinking of writing a book. So that's what I'm just going to tell you. Those books, those pictures will go into that book. I said, that's great. That's real good. The story talks about this great white deer, you know, this chocolate day here, and this woodpecker, you know, and it's called the woodpecker story, but it's talking about the courting. Anyway, so in short, she get calls after a few weeks after that, and she goes, we drew those pictures up. is it okay if we turn it into a bilingual story? I mean, this is, now I knew she was. And I says, well, I says, that story is a Ho-Chunk story, I says, and I says, talking about something specific, our courting fluid, right? I said, it'd be nice if you actually, told that story in Ho-Chunk as well. I said, and she goes, oh, I think we can do that. So I hooked her up and told her, here's who you want to contact in our language division. Sure enough, 2 weeks, if not a little more, she called back again. Oh, we got it deciphered or translated into Ho-Chunk and to Spanish, and I want to tell it in English. And she did that. She created this book, and she did it to draft. She sent it to me, and long story short, with Lincoln Elementary, all these children down there, these minority groups of people living, going to school there, they ended up doing something very useful, and they created a useful tool out of the process there, which was, to me, was so interesting. And I had some grant dollars left. And I said, if you print that book out, I said, I'd pay for that. I'd buy the copyright for you for making it. She goes, oh, no, you can have it. No. And I said, no, I mean, you're spending a lot of your time and, effort on this. And so in short, we ended up writing the book, drafting it out, publishing it. She had to go through our IRB. The nation has an IRB to make sure everything was accurate, and got the stamp approval from that. This is Emily right here, Schrader, and this is the one that spoke in Spanish on here. I don't have a picture of Elliot on here who spoke in Ho-Chunk on here. Inside the front cover, there's these QR codes where you put it on there. You can hear them speak in their language and follow along. Not only with the pictures on the left side of the page, but also the 3 languages on this side, all written out perfectly on here. So it's a quadlingual book with pictures tell 1,000 words, right? So you get the pictures in these 3 other languages in this book. And it was a beautiful thing. And I mean, this is something that I think through this, this survey, this research on here, additional schools, can utilize this document on here and one of the things I did as well, Edgewood College, of course, University of Madison, their awareness of First Nations there and creating, cultural resource management plans for the FDG Mounds and cultural resources on colleges. So this is a really big thing. University of Madison did that. And I was pretty impressed with being contacted to ask, is it sensitive or insensitive to do certain things and so on and so forth. And there's a learning curve to everything. And I was right in that same ballpark trying to learn certain things because, which we'll touch about base on a little bit later, there was a lot of focus on mounds within the last dozen years. And so it'll be interesting to talk about the Historical Society and the nation joining forces. And we actually went together to court, and ended up in the state Supreme Court there fighting a family there trying to destroy mounds that were being protected by the Burial Law. Oh yeah, so we'll get to that. But anyways, and this is, university is a good example of them recognizing the First Nations. And although, they're limited to what they can do there, they did a lot of good things. That Dejo Paul I mentioned there, the creation of that facility there, and utilizing Ho-Chunk's history and aspects of our people within the Madison area there. We went to the point where we included all tribes there. There's a fire circle out in front of it there that has all of our tribes insignias on the seats around this fire area there that we can take people even to this day and sit down there. And talk about the history of that lake that's before them, that Mendota Lake out there. And I planted a white oak over here with an elder vine there that, so they can come and place some tobacco there when they come there and ask, for some direction and seek guidance or we'll do whatever they want there, with that tree there. A gift that we had given to Joe Paul afterwards. So we utilize it every year. This Wisconsin Ideas Seminar, from 2015, it might be before that, until now, except for the pandemic issue. We've been actively involved with the kickoff of their week-long bus tour of the state there. We started right here in Madison, and we make sure that they're aware that Madison, is very connected to our ancestral homelands, and that it still holds as much weight to us as a people here. And so when they go and they come back, I usually expect this bus load of people just dragging themselves out of there. but they don't. They're just full of information and they're eager, and they come back here and they sit there and they listen to me, I think 1 hour, and that's about the end of it. So, but the land acknowledgement work, that's what this down here, this sign of Bascom Hill there. The sign might not be there. I think they've been doing some renovation and it's moved in the thing. But it took, some time in doing, but they wanted to, in some short, eloquent ways of writing here, create a land acknowledgement of this land, being ancestrally tied to groups of people here before this college came here. And that's what that is all about there. You'll see the Ho-Chunk Nation insignia and the university on here. So those little steps towards these collaborative efforts to assure that the underrepresented are now becoming recognized in various ways. The egg program I mentioned, I'll be going probably, is it next week or a week after that, to speak with a group there. Safe distancing has to be done, but a limited group there, but he wants to hear a little bit about the egg program and how Ho-Chunks, traditionally look at agriculture. So here's the individual. A lot of people that studies history knows about in Wisconsin is Charlie Brown. He's in the chapter 12 there on page 94, the education part of it. And his claim to fame, it's his work with the mounds. And a lot of people say preservation. And I in part do too, because without all the work he did, we wouldn't have as much awareness collectively about mounds. We would have caught up. We would have had problems. And so this guy saved a lot of mounds, but he also, destroyed a lot of mounds. And archaeologists, if there's archaeologists, listening this evening, I'm sorry, but it's a destructive type of science. And I always say it's a science based off, conjecture and speculation. That they dig a lot of stuff up and they look at it and they make their speculations of what they're looking at. So very rarely do they come and ask. Charlie Brown, though, did hang around with some natives in his time, Ho-Chunk. They were always referred to as Winnebagos. And so we would ask. He was curious about that. And so I don't know how those conversations went, but obviously he connected that with the Ho-Chunk and those mound systems in our ancestral areas. So Madison, if you took a picture of it, I don't know how high this up here, but there, I'm going to put this mouse on it right there. That's the capital right there, right? Charlie Brown took in on some old plats. He had, he started putting on, to, I don't know if he did it personally or if he had somebody do it, but he likely did it, but he placed cultural aspects in Mendota, or I mean, in this section right here, this T7 North, Range 9 East. And he began to place, and I took the liberty of highlighting in red, the mounds, the villages, the springs right in here is a corn. I think right in this area right in here, there's some cornfields right there. And he has this key that shows what all these emblems are on here. But suffice to say, the Madison area, was just inundated with not only mounds and villages, right? And different aspects that people, need in order to live here. It's such a large group of people, right? But Madison has that. We often say those big grand marshes, Horicon and the marshes around here. Those are Walmarts of old. That's where you get your building structures. That's where you would get those types of food that would hold you through the late fall and early spring and winter in there. If you didn't happen to create the large food caches that would get you through the winter. Madison hit A, and I think I took this off the historic site is ASI site. I don't know what I put in there, but it basically showed, I think it was mainly the remnants of mounds left that are either cataloged or maybe just in the database there. There's the Capitol right here. There used to be a Panther Mound and some conifers right in there, and they're not even there anymore. So they're forgotten. So, and that kind of leads us to this amendment bill of AB 118, I don't know if it's called Amendment Bill or not, but Assembly Bill? I don't know. Anyway, so it was the answer to an issue that had happened in 2016. And people that did some research and or lives local to Madison there, maybe you remember back in the cold January there of this issue that came up here, Save the Mounds. And this was the battle cry that people used in Madison there to protect this Wisconsin statute 157.70 because this bill came out here, this amendment of 620, where they the powers that be in Madison wanted to go and streamline the burial law and make it a little more efficient, right, and give landowners back some of their rights. You know that the state historic society shouldn't have the right to say you can't, you can't dig up that burial if you wanted that swimming pool. And there was a few other things that law that basically stripped the powers from the historic society and took away its teeth, and they wanted to take away destruction of burials from having fines and fees and jail time to just misdemeanors. And so the battle cry was that and it fell upon at times the majority of the tribes gathering together on a cold January. I think it was below zero or close to it there. And we joined forces at the courthouse. I mean, and when I say we, I mean anybody that was familiar with this attack against something that was unique to Wisconsin, the protection of these burial sites through this burial law that was created in 1990. Well, they threw it out, so, and then for the next year and a half, they created a study committee there because they wanted to get to the bottom of, is it something that is dated and needs to be, fixed? And the different images, though, that you see here, you saw, these traditional flags of all the tribes and the drum inside the, what is that, the tundra of the Capitol there, because it was something that was very offensive to us. We've already had thousands of our burial sites and sacred sites and so on and so forth destroyed, because they're not recognized, like, a Christian cemetery across the street, has afforded protection, but if you have an effigy mound over here, it wasn't quite viewed that, even though they're considered by that state law as burial markers, grave markers. These earthworks are right in the law. Good example, I think, what is that cemetery over there? Forest Hill Cemetery has effigy mounds there, and they have all these stones piled up right up one side. I guess that they're recognized now, and I go by there once in a while to make sure somebody isn't finding somebody fresh on top of the mound, But so yeah, so in short, with this law here, it totally was something that was good for the history of City of Madison, I believe, and because you go back to Charlie Brown, and he wanted, I think there was like 800 and what it was cited on here, 887 was it, known mound systems in the city area, the Lake Bagel area, the 4 lakes. And they said, I think in the document, there was like at that time, 65% of them had been destroyed from urbanism and the city's processes and today's societal ways. And he was in fear of them disappearing altogether. I know Washington, was aware of what was going on with these earthworks because they created just across the way, right? Nijate, that big river I told you, the Mississippi. They created the Effigy Mounds National Monument because they felt that they're unique to our history, and that maybe perhaps they need to be protected, the last few, because they're soon to be gone. And so they created that Effigy Mounds National Monument that to be protected, and so there was a lot of destructions of these sacred sites taking place, and so we didn't need that here in Wisconsin, for example. And so we became up in arms with that process on that too. So this survey, this research survey, I mean, it can in part, recognize, maybe alternative ways of creating documentation for landmarks. And at Dejewel Paul, it isn't considered something eligible yet due to time, but if you document it accurately now, the process that was used involved, to create that, and not only the structure itself, but the surrounding, the ape of that project, that area of potential effects, those cultural resources that make it what it is today. Those are the things that can add weight to that document later if you take it from the historic site, right, or landmark, to something on the National Register as a more prominent of displaying what Madison truly is. So I think this is my last one. So this page here, it also talks about all the additional materials that's within the document, and that talks about the Wangchik, on page 105 there. It talks about this group of people that were formed to in part help, indigenous peoples, either in the communities and or, on the university level over there. Because, and they put on, I think, annual powwows, and that's one thing that I don't necessarily really try to show a tribe as being part of. They do powwows. We have gaming facilities, and we have so on and so forth. So I don't really talk about that, but it has to be told a little bit too. Our first gaming facility, our first bingo halls, is how our fledgling government from 1963 on to present began to get funding, right, in order to create the departments and in part in order to perpetuate our people better. You need money, to live nowadays. And so that bingo and the future gaming facilities and our LLCs and all these other hotels and gas stations, those are what we created as a portfolio to carry us on. And Madison is no different. We have 4 acres, I think it is, of trust land in the Madison area, 4 acres for a gaming facility. We purchased land around it. It's fee simple to pay taxes on that and follow zoning and so on and so forth on there. But on those 4 acres, those gaming dollars is what generates in part, our ability to govern ourselves. So it's important for us to protect that. And as land is placed into trust, if we, by chance hopes to do that here some days, we always do those in lieu of taxes too, right? So it's offset taxes. They said in lieu of taxes is actually another form of taxes, which is true, but at least the money is going to your community right there close. But that powwow there, it brings a lot of different tribal members and the communities together. That Etta Deer, this lady here is well known for her processes through life of supporting Native American awareness on here. And then in chapter 14, it also spoke of the art and literature. And that several artists here passed away, actually, some of them. Truman Lowe and Harry Whitehorse, in the Madison area here. You'll go all through Madison and you'll see his art forms out here, whether it's a totem or a bust or some artwork here and there. You'll see it there, and Truman was another one. And you'll find this in a lot of the underrepresented communities there, that there is this natural talent out here that is often overlooked. Their artwork, are placed, and there's meaning to it. It isn't just something splashed on a wall there. There's meaning to their process on there. But to create it to be recognized, what do you do to do that? My last thoughts were, and I tend to babble. So they have a multi-component history here, and that's one of the things that I think if we have to continue to meet together to update and revisit the document there, I mean, this is a great starting point, And in part, there's a lot of information there to really sink your teeth into already and begin to think of new and better ways of better documenting Madison's history, the surrounding communities. I put that in here. This living document is a very important thing, and it's what drives, you know, preservation. You know, folks, Historic Society, Schiphol office, for example, and local researchers. They read a document on here, and it just kind of like just turns on light bulbs here and there. And I think that is a good thing. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'm going to shut this off here. And if I have any, I don't know if I spent an hour talking or not. I apologize if I did or didn't. So
No, it was terrific. Thank you so much. Okay.
so any questions then?
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, we can take one or two. We're a little bit over time, so if anyone has to go, we completely understand. But if there are any questions, you should be able to unmute yourselves now. Jerry.
I have a question, Bill, and thank you so much for that presentation. It was informative. It was colorful. It was fascinating. Beautiful job for someone. You sure you've never done a Zoom before? It looked totally professional.
Well, Jennifer walked me through it beforehand. So.
That was really, really, really quite enlightening. Yes, I had a question originally about what the University of Wisconsin is doing following the, announcements, events, and whatnot that we are on Dejoke land and so forth. And you answered all that beautifully. I have a quick question though about your middle name or your Ho-Chunk name. Yes. I'm a former world language teacher. And so I'm looking at the spelling of it and noticing, and on the other words you showed too, these diacritical marks, like what I would call a cedilla under the C in French, but you have it under the A, or an umlaut like in German above the G. Are they pronunciation guides or something else?
Yeah. For the most part, yes. I call them finches, tails.
Okay.
Now, that no has to be said with a different tonation than if you said this nah. So now Chuck Vijay is my name, and means knocks down fence, and it always comes with a good story. And when you get received name, and those stories are what kind of gives you in part direction, right? And so now Chuck Vijay means knocks down fence, and it talks about it. It's an ancient old name, and it talks about.
Thank you.
And what it describes there too, but yeah, those little extras are like nasal sounds and and so on and so forth. And you go to our Ho-Chunk Nation language division and request, and there's actually a Ho-Chunk font that we use that has those in there. It's just a different way of pushing on the keyboard on here. And what I found out though, and I learned this the hard way with Aaron Birdbear, and he gives these instructional guides and tours, and he does a lot for the university. Anyway, he and part when we were working on that Bascom Hills plaque, he gifted me a knife, a pocket knife, or the folding multi-tool, and on it was my name, Nawat Chucky J. But it wasn't written the way we would write it. It was written as he asked me, or I had sent him my Ho-Chunk name the way it was written one time. Well, I didn't realize that if he doesn't have that font in his computer, it just totally garbles it up. And I go, oh, I know what that is. And then it was it was a reminder of me that I have to make sure that I have to explain to people that even though I can read it, they're not able to read that. And so the process.
Good story. Yeah.
Apologize for that, but it kind of helps.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Barbara Furstenberg with the Dane County Historical Society. And I know you mentioned about the Lake Farm Park and the Historical Society. And we are in the process of doing starting a project that I think is very exciting. And I think you have so many ideas that could contribute. And I'm just curious, first of all, your name has come up as a resource person.
Sure.
However, I don't know whether or not, have you ever actually officially been contacted?
No, well, it seems like it depends on how it was sent to me. If it was sent by email, I usually respond back. If they left a message on my phone, it goes to my email and I'll read it, but I usually check them and while I'm driving, and I sometimes don't get back to them. But if you email me, Barbara, that'd be a good way of doing it. And I'd be more than happy to help you out down there. Are you from the fish hatchery area?
No.
Oh, because I know a Furstenberg from over there.
Really?
Oh, yeah, Jerry and Sharon Furstenberg. I don't know if you know them. They moved from Madison up by us area. Is quite the character too. Well, that guy is a history buff in himself there. Jerry Furstenberg.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not part of my family.
Oh,
But anyway,
you get a hold of Jennifer later. Get a hold of Jennifer later and she can send you the email for
Pardon?
Get a hold of Jennifer and she can send you my email.
Okay. Thank you so much. And don't forget me. Or don't forget us.
I wrote you down.
It really made me so excited about this project. And when you hear about it, I think you'll get excited too.
Well, that sounds good. I appreciate you showing up this evening.
Thank you.
Barbara, you can email me and I can email you his email. info@madisonpreservation.org.
Okay. And Madison Preservation is all one word?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great.
Yes.
Do we have
I
any
also put it in the message just.
sorry about
Oh, I'm sorry too. I just put my email address right in the message too.
Oh, great. It's in the chat. Oh, maybe I'll put it to Barbara. Okay. So do we have any more questions? Maybe one more or to go? I popped it in the chat, Barbara, so you can grab it there too.
Okay. So now if I click on chat, I'm sorry, I totally
Oh,
know.
yeah. Yep. If you click on chat, and
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I want to thank Bill for this terrific presentation and taking the time, as well as our events committee, Jerry, who you heard. She's on the events committee. We also have Beth Stofflet and Bill Martinelli, who work tirelessly to put together these events. So definitely thank them too. And again, we're recording this, so it will be on our website. Definitely share. The part 1 and part 2 are also on our website, where you can access our YouTube page where the actual videos are. And if you'd like to email us at info@madisonpreservation.com with any comments or suggestions for future virtual events, we are definitely open to that. So I think that's it for us. So everyone have a terrific night. Bill, thanks again. Amazing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, have a great night, everyone.